Hey kids, it's Jurassic James, and on this Jurassic James Explains, we're looking at Albertosaurus. So simply put, my friend Jim Connor is going to the Terrell Museum in Canada and asked me what's the best Albertosaurus figure, and instead of just telling him in an email, I thought do a video, right? So first of all, same rules, older models, newer models. I'm pretty sure there's some high-end Albertosaurus figures out there, but these are the ones that are most easily, collectible. The first guy here, in my opinion, up front, is the most accurate Albertosaurus out there. Again, 2003 Carnegie, and the idea is that it has a standard three toes going forward, two claw on the side, two fingers here. The hands are somewhat trying to do the palm to palm correctly. It's just these two fingers, palm to palm. But the idea is that this guy, as far as your standard issue Albertosaurus, really great. Discovery in 1884 by Terrell himself, actually, the guy the museum named after. They were finding these Albertosaurus parts, and he thought it was one thing. Cope and Marsh both gave him different names. Maybe the Bone Wars was still kind of a thing at the time. But it wasn't until 1905 when Henry Fairfax Osborne, who was doing the paper on Tyrannosaurus Rex, wrote in a footnote or the last page, his own page, he named Albertosaurus sarcophagus. So the idea here, yes, the word sarcophagus, the species of sarcophagus, like in Egypt, meaning flesh eater. So the idea here is that that's the name when it first formally was established. Now, that being said, the name Albertosaurus means Alberta's lizard, after the province in Canada where they're found, of course. And this guy shows all those features. This is my favorite one, actually. Well, favorite one scientifically in the collection. Next, we have a Schlee, which is the German company. And like I said, this one, it harkens back to the older style model. I mean, the skull doesn't have the features that Albertosaurus is really important enough. They have these little crests over their eyes, very distinguished crests. And this guy doesn't even have the crest here. And in fact, the middle of its skull kind of like arcs up, so you can kind of see how it looks more like a generic lizard monster creature than a tyrannosaurid dinosaur, right? But anyway, so on that note, Albertosaurus is a member of the tyrannosaurid group family, related to T-Rex. So these are the two I had forever. They're not. With T-Rex out there and Allosaurus being popular in Jurassic, Albertosaurus is not a well-known dinosaur. But the idea is that when Jurassic World, the new toy line came out, they essentially are making all these really cool, some obscure and some well-known dinosaurs. And when I saw they had an Albertosaurus coming out, I was super excited. I was like, wow, finally, an Albertosaurus that's a certain size. So here's the model itself. Now, what I like about it, of course, is that the Jurassic Park line are trying to turn the hands more in, like more scientifically accurate. I like that the crests are here on the front. And one thing to point out is that there's the holes in the skull, the nose holes in ours, the orbit's where the eye is. The anterior and orbital fenestra, or anterior to the orbit, before the orbit, is this hole right here where the olfactory, just the smell is held. The crests we see on this guy and Allosaurus and Dilophosaurus, those crests are actually parts of the bone above that have extended. Basically, it's a part of that part. The important thing with this crest, though, for one thing, is that notice they're usually very soft, or not soft. They're not. They're more delicate. They're not solid like a horn of a ceratopsian. But the idea is that these guys have these really, and they're right for the eye. So that tells most paleontologists that they're for identification, they're for communication. That if I'm looking you in the eye, that's in front of your eye, I know where to look, and I can see that you're different, because it's been hypothesized that the crests of these individual animals may have been different. We've seen, obviously individuals had different crest designs among all the sauropods, but even within the species differentiation. Now, yes, it can be fossilization too, but the idea is that that's the way of identifying, like a unibrow or not a unibrow, or whatever. So this guy, it's really cool about him. He has Jurassic World. Oh, I didn't do it right. So there's like this layer. So I mentioned before in my videos how I love the dino damage of Jurassic World and Jurassic Park. The problem is that in the later series, they just have open wounds in the animal, and I just don't like there's a scar here. I get it. It's been fighting. But if you hit the first one, did it wrong. When you hit this one, the skin should go back, and there are ribs right. There are ribs right here, like that, and you hit those, and get to the meat like that. So it's like a double thing, but it always doesn't work for me properly. Anyway, it's soft. Anyway, so. This guy here is a pretty good model, especially for a certain size range of toys. They did a repaint, but the repaint is far more simple. Basically, there's no dino damage. It just does like this. And if I were a kid, I would be playing with these in the backyard and I would have sexual dimorphism. I would have male and female. Now, with Albertosaurus itself, one thing to point out with this guy is that it is often associated with being a pack hunting animal, and that's because in the dry island site, there were about 20, estimated to be 26 Albertosauruses found. But the story is really kind of interesting. That Barnum Brown, the guy who found T-Rex as we know it, he went there, and as the story always told, last part of the trip, limited resources, they found this site, all these bones. They picked out the ones they couldn't take them all off. They picked what they knew what it could be, and then that's like 1910. 1996, Phil Curry in Canada, one of the world's most well-known theropod experts, took 4 photographs and rediscovered the site. And have been digging there for years, and they found up to 26 of these Albertosauruses. So the first thing people say, well, you find them all together, what does that tell you? The assumption is always like pack hunting. But here's the thing to remember, that even though they're together, the taphonomy, they could have died and got washed down river. It wasn't a predator trap because they didn't find any herbivores. It seemed to be just the Albertosauruses. So if you don't know, a predator trap is when an animal like a tar pit, the woolly mammoths get stuck, the dire wolves come to eat it and they get stuck too, and then the vulture comes for the wolves, they get stuck, and so it's all these predators, only one herbivore. They only found Albertosaurus in this one site. There was one older individual, about 28 years old, based on bone rings. Most of them were between like 14 and 23 on average. And there's a small one that was like 6 feet, let's say small, it was 6 feet long. That was their baby there. But the interpretation of this has always been they're pack hunters. And it's the largest, I believe, the largest Cretaceous bone bed of predators known to date. So whether or not there was a drought, they went to the same spot, we don't know. That's still being determined and debated hotly. But one thing to point out what Albertosaurus, where it fits in a family tree. So one thing to point out with Tyrannosaurs in general. Now there's many Tyrannosaurs. I have many Tyrannosaur models here, not just T-Rex, but Tyrannosaur models. But Albertosaurus is close related to Gorgosaurus, this guy right here. Gorgosaurus is made famous by Walking with Dinosaurs, the one where they're talking. Based, not the narration of the BBC, but the actual movie with their Patchy going south. And to the point at which that Gorgosaurus and Albertosaurus were thought to be the same genus for a while, it's been argued. Phil Curry's like, no, so it's still being debated. But the main thing is that these animals are around the same size, but they live in different ranges. They both have little crest for their eyes. Another Tyrannosaur that may have been a contemporary of Albertosaurus was Dilophosaurus. This guy right here, I mentioned a video before on him. Got it from Dinosaur Park in Bastrop, Texas. And of course, Tyrannosaurus Rex is the most well-known Tyrannosaur because it's the largest and the last, and So the idea is that people look at these guys, and the average person will never know the difference. I mean, T-Rex is bigger, and its skull is more bulky. But in general, the average person will never know the difference because, only a few people who specialize in Tyrannosaurs debate this. But to give you an idea, there's a genus called Panthera. And Panthera tigers, Panthera leo, or lions, we have our male and female sexual dimorphism. But we also have leopards too. So you and I can look at these animals and tell, tigers have stripes, leopards have these spots, the lions have the general tan, and the males have manes. That's very clear. But skeletal-wise, if you look at these big cats, they're very similar. I mean, unless you know what you're looking for, what features. I mean, other than comparing a leopard size to a lion or a tiger size, for the most part, they're all very similar skeleton designs. So we take for granted that the superficial look of the animal is so different. But with these guys, it's a similar thing. I mean, yeah, T-Rex is huge and different rock layer. But the idea is that these guys look very similar, very close. And I mean, I'm pretty sure in life they may have very different patterns. But in general, looking at the bones and shape, that's how we determine different species in paleontology. We use morphology, the shape of the bone. So that's an example there. Now, for Albertosaurus itself, I want to point out one last thing, that who did he live with, or it lived with, right? And the idea is that we have found Albertosaurus living side by side with Hypacrosaurus, which I did mention in my Hadrosaur video, Pachyrhinoceros from the north, and of course Albertosaurus. There's some documentary animation thing showing a herd of Albertosaurus is going down, migrating south, and being hunted by Albertosaurus. And it's interesting, the Albertosaurus they're a dark color, and their skulls, their heads have a white to it. It's I don't know, it looks like a skull to me. Anyway, but also many of the papers reference the fact that in the same environment we have rays and sharks, and we also have sturgeon, which are these fish we have today in the Great Lakes, for example. And of course we have Camptosaurus, which are like crocodile-like animals, but they actually survived the extinction event. They lived into the Eocene. But anyway, but the point of showing them too is that when you're doing your Albertosaurus ecology, like these are your principal players, and I often only go over the dinosaurs because that's what I think you're here for. But I wanted to point out there are invertebrates too, there or not invertebrates, non-dinosaurian invertebrates actually in the environment. So if you're playing Albertosaurus, here's your local wildlife. That being said, I hope you enjoy. As I mentioned before, this Carnegie 2006 is this model I know of. If you know a better one, put it in the comments below. And thank you for tuning in. I'll see you guys later.